boy, do we have a show for you. And let me introduce my co-host first. Co-host.
Chris Summerall, public servant for the citizens of the city of Detroit.
Ken Coleman, Detroit based author and historian.
Darnell McLaurin, civil servant, union director, and concerned citizen.
Concerned citizen. I think we all are. But as we talked about on my first show, in case some of you did not hear, my producer, Michelle Watson's mom died yesterday, and we want to send tribute and sympathy off to her. She's a wonderful part of our company here and cherished, and her mom lived to be 96 years old, which is not given to many. And we applaud Mrs. Weiss. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman. And our deepest sympathies go to Michelle and her family. Now, as is our tradition, and I have Mr. Ken Coleman here today, we do On This Day. Well, on this day, I'm going to read some of that On This Day history, but then I have to go back to on this day yesterday too, because something was very significant. On this day, March 27th, Maria Ewing is born in Detroit. She will become a celebrated opera singer who will debut at the Metropolitan Opera in 1976. And this was, she was born at 1950. And she was in Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. A soprano, Ewing will actively perform through the 80s and 90s, both here and in Europe. She did Carmen, Salome, Lady Macbeth, and so forth. Because I cannot sing opera, I have to go to yesterday, which was March 26. And on March 26 in 1968, Motown Records releases Ain't Nothing But the Real Thing by Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell. Ain't nothing like the real thing, baby. Ain't nothing like the real thing. Oh, I'm not bad this morning. Well, tomorrow, just so happens, tomorrow, the Temptations in 1971 released Just My Imagination, Running Away with Me. So I had to tell you about that. That was very important and very, very significant. And they came from Motown, right here in D-Town. Gentlemen, boy, do we have some topics. Some are on topic and off topics. But I did want to start, before we start talking about anything, you might notice what was missing. I did not put anything out about the lady whose children were found in the freezer. Mm-hmm. I was very distressed by that, and I'm just wondering what's happening to our society. Any thoughts?
Well, definitely it was, it was alarming even in a society where we're desensitized. I had to listen twice to make sure that what I heard was real. As far as society, I think that it's an indicator that the bar is getting even lower as far as what we can expect to hear. Unfortunately, I don't think we've bottomed out yet. However, I think that enough people are upset and angered about this that hopefully justice will come for those kids.
Well, I agree with Chris. It hit home for me a little bit, Brenda, because
it's right near you.
The King Homes is in my Elmwood Park neighborhood. My child goes to school probably 1,000 feet away from that development. We live about 2,000 feet away from it. And as the news broke, I picked it up like a lot of us pick up news now on social media. A trained journalist, I sort of take a step back when I hear these things to sort of hear more information, hoping that, hoping that it wasn't actually bodies, that it was something else, hoping that it wasn't her or there was some foul play, although the tragedy is still a tragedy no matter under any circumstance. But as we learn more about it, it becomes even more gruesome, even more perplexing, and even more frustrating.
I agree. under the nose of the people who live next door, under the nose of the family members. It's difficult sometimes to sort of take that in, what people may be going through right under your nose. Those two children that were, left to deal with that situation, living in the house, knowing that their brother and sister is, 10 feet away, 20 feet away in a freezer. They got up and played, they watched television, they ate, knowing that their brothers and sister was in the freezer. That's absolutely horrendous. The psychological impact is unmeasurable. It's very sad. On a quick note, though, Brenda, if I may, I would like to send a prayer out to the family of Daryl Gordon, who lost his life yesterday in an apartment building fire, Cincinnati Fire Department.
Oh, firefighters and police are just some of the bravest. We talk about people who have gumption. And they're brave. How many people can say they're brave? I'm not brave. I mean, like that.
Or run into a fire as opposed to running away from it.
Right, I run away.
Or shooting. Yeah.
And my nephew turned in his retirement papers 2 days ago, and he was just with the NYPD for 21 years. And he said things are just getting too crazy. He said it's going to be a hot summer because in his precinct, that fight at McDonald's, you heard about that big fight?
Yes.
And that was his precinct. Some other things of a horrendous and national nature had been happening in his precinct. And he says he has a son and a wife, and he wants to continue to come home to them. Things are just getting a little crazy and a little too tough. But what hurt me about this situation with the freezer was she had the daughter, and she admitted this, one daughter put the other daughter in the freezer. How do you do that? And like you said, scarred. These children will be scarred. But somebody, I think it was Sherry Margolis, said something that was kind of crazy. She says, how did teachers let them fall through the crack? Teachers? This lady said she was homeschooling the kids.
I think that when you have something so horrendous, so disturbing, there's a cry for someone to point the finger on someone, even if it's as absurd as pointing out at teachers who have nothing to do with this situation whatsoever. People inward, want to have someone to say, why did you let this happen? And right now, I think we're all still shaking our head in disbelief, and we just really can't really wrap our heads around the situation right now.
Okay, good. Quickly, anyone else?
I think one of the things I've sort of been trained to do, at least professionally, is to sort of try to, as the facts come out, analyze these things. Obviously horrendous, no question about it. What was the mother thinking? All of those things. The one of the daughters having to put the sibling into the freezer. It's all very horrendous. I need time to process it. And then these days when we sort of react to things right away through social media and other organs, you just have to wonder what was going on.
Well,
she
she said she was homeschooling the children in order for people not to ask questions about where they are and so forth. But for someone to blame teachers, that without a doubt was crazy. Now let's talk about some other. Oh, Darnell, did you have something?
No, I did just want to point out the fact that they did speak to the school, not necessarily the teachers, and the school had no record of them being enrolled in school over the last several years. Right. So it's not the teacher's responsibility at that point.
Right. And my thing, the grandmother, I guess it's the father of the children's mother, spoke on the news, and she said, well, we had been trying to see the kids, but they had every excuse. If that was my grandchild, I would have called the police.
And the father, right.
Yes. Well, we don't know where the father could have been, but a grandmother wants to be around their grandchildren. It's just appalling. But speaking of appalling, the co-pilot of that plane deliberately ran that plane into the mountains. Does this affect your flying attitude?
Well, another just story that you just shake your head in disbelief. I suspect that we'll see more of this. I don't
more of this.
Things around aircraft and whether they're domestic terrorism, foreign terrorism, or just people falling off the deep end and doing something crazy like that, you're going to see more of it. Does it deter me from flying? No, I don't fly all that often, and try to sort of put myself in a mindset when I do get on a plane is to say a prayer. But again, what federal officials will tell you is that you're far safer in an airplane than driving on a freeway. And so you look at it that way, but these things do have a way of wearing on your mind.
But sometimes don't you question the stability of the people you put your lives in their hands?
I agree, Brenda. I think that what was alarming about this story was when they dug into the records and the flight hours of the co-pilot being relatively few.
Right.
For the main pilot to step away. I think that there may be an instance now to look into whatever their protocol is, because this was definitely something that I feel potentially could have been avoided. If certain protocol was in place, I'm not sure. And I also have heard something a little different, that there is a theory possibly that this wasn't intentional. I've heard that story where could the co-pilot have blocked out because there wasn't any dialogue. It just went mute. And so obviously the direct beeline toward the Alps was an indicator of intent. However, with the lack of dialogue, it leaves a lot of unanswered questions.
Well, then too, someone trying to get the pilot trying to get into the control room.
Suggest that there was at least.
And they said they heard the people screaming in the background. I remember when I was on tour, I did 70 planes in a matter of 4 months. Oh. It was crazy, and every time I just got nervous, even though you were used to it. Darnell, did you have a...
Yes, actually, if you look at the plane situation, they have redundant systems for safety purposes. And it appears that some of those safety concerns or issues were deactivated. That means that somebody had to do it. And so the plane was flying at 30,000 feet. The one pilot exited the pilot booth to go to the restroom, and then that's when the plane took a nosedive, or beeline, as Chris said, straight into the Alps. So I do believe it was foul play. So, but more importantly, security measures have been changed for the passengers. I think now we have to look at security measures for the people that work on the airline industries, and just some of the
mental
things.
Health testing too.
Exactly.
Well, and I just remember seeing earlier in the week, in an unrelated news story, here in the States, legislation on Capitol Hill that would require pilots and other airline officials to go through TSA checks and some of the same checks that we as passengers do, maybe because of some of these same issues.
And the way we have it is, if one pilot leaves the cockpit, somebody has to go in there,
So I think the flying industry as a whole, yes, by far is safe. If you look at all the planes that fly across the world, it is relatively safe. Some of the practices, which I don't agree with. There was an aircraft where the passengers were left on a runway several weeks ago for over 9 hours.
Is that crazy?
I would absolutely go insane in that tube for 9 hours.
No, you'd be standing up there telling jokes. Well,
or crying. What is it?
But I think that when this come on the heel of the disappearance of the different flights, it's just really been bombarding us with these sensational or unbelievable accounts that they do subconsciously kind of mess with you. I know I recently took a flight, and I have a habit. I'm trying to go to sleep as soon as possible. If we go down, let me wake up to it. I don't want to be there and live through every moment and knock me out. And I sometimes giggle to myself sometimes when they give the safety briefing when you're on the plane. And recently I sat on the exit row, and he was like, "Are you willing to assist everyone out?" And they said, I was like, "Yeah."
I only said yes because my legs are long in the exit row,
Exactly.
That's the only reason I said yes. But I've been in planes that as tall as I am, I couldn't stand up straight in the planes. The planes were so little, and we flew low, but not low enough where if I jumped out, I wouldn't get hurt. I mean, planes are something, and I cannot sleep on a plane. I've tried to sleep on a plane. I just can't do it.
I took a 12-hour flight to go see my wife. She was in South Africa for a year, and I remember taking that flight. The first leg was 12 hours, and all I could do was just ask the stewardess, "Can I have some more wine? I want to go to sleep. I want to go to sleep."
It's stressful, and I think
do
the
it.
older you get, the worse it is. I know when I was young, when I was in the military flying overseas, 14, 16-hour flights didn't bother me. But now, just that 1 hour flight to D.C. is like, hurry up and get there. You know what I mean? So I can't imagine doing 14 hours now. That's why I stay within the tri-state area when I travel.
Wow. Oh, you do?
He's like John Madden. He traveled by bus. He got his own motor coach.
Well, when I was on tour, Sister Soldier was on tour with me. She did not take a plane anywhere. We had Michael, her husband, would drive everywhere. So, I mean, remember, we performed in L.A.
Right.
And she lives in New Jersey, excuse me. But when we performed in Florida, every place, they drove.
Maybe it's time to invest in Greyhound.
Right.
Yeah, well, or
What that
a
start
good,
look like?
good chauffeur.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need a husband who could drive, or a companion. I don't need a husband.
Or a good Uber driver.
A good Uber.
No, I don't think I've seen those Uber cars. I don't think I could fit in it.
No,
There are a
Uber
lot
cars
of
are,
variety.
it's right. It's the personal vehicle of
Do we
whoever's
have them
Ubering.
here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they're here.
Although there was a question if they were here legally. Right.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
And then
Where?
there's also Lyft,
Lyft?
which is similar. And there's another service called what is To Go Drive, where you call them up, you order
I
it,
didn't know that.
and they tell you where the car is. They give you the code. You go drive the car and leave it.
They might want to think twice about that real quick.
Well,
It's a good service, though. It's a really good service.
I'm just saying.
I
they might wanna think
mean,
twice
but do
about
you
it.
know, speaking of those kind of things, that's entrepreneurship, finding a need or creating a need. So people talk about jobs, create your own. Think about something that people need, or you try to get them to need.
I mean, that's what the Koreans did with the Harris
Oh, Lord.
supply stores.
Lord, yes, they
They
did.
identified a need, and they
And statistics show that 3 out of 4 people, even on this panel, will need those services.
The hair services?
It's
Yeah.
great to be back on Table Talk.
I don't plan to do it. I don't plan to do it personally. Now, the House is trying to pass a bill. Well, it did pass 7436, which would remove cash assistance but not affect food stamps or housing benefits from families where a child is considered chronically truant as determined by school district rules. That means that child is not coming to school. Because we had certain students who missed so many days, and we'd be looking for them. We send a truancy officer out to the house. How do you not let your child go to school? But do you think this is fair?
Well, I think that there has to be some type of monitoring there. As far as my understanding, the compensation that they get, the money is based a lot of times on the amount of
Having children in the
children
house.
So if you're not, quote unquote, ensuring that these children are being taken care of, which would include them getting an education, then maybe that money does need to be policed better. I think that there needs to be a little clarification as to how this should go about. However, I think that the parents or whoever's receiving the money should be held accountable to a degree.
I'm good with accountability, but it's always peculiar to me when these retcons enter these bills where they want to legislate morality, and then they
All
vote
of the
against
time.
stuff. They'll tell you in a minute about civil rights legislation. Well, we can't legislate morality, and people will have in their hearts what they want to do. And anytime they want to drug test
That was a
welfare
good
recipients,
impersonation.
I'm getting better at it, Brenda. I'm doing 2 shows nightly. But no, I mean it's a hypocrisy on one end. You will see, these drug testing bills. I worked in the legislature for years. You see them happen in every session. You see this truancy bill, as the story points out, this was introduced in the last session, passed in the Senate, passed in the House, did not pass in the Senate. And so I'm just looking for some.
Yeah, how are you going to legislate that? Plus, if I were one of those parents, I could say, well, I'm homeschooling my child.
You know, there's 7 billion people on this planet, Brenda, and there's not 7 billion jobs. Somebody's going to need assistance. So, but when you start regulating how you're going to assist them versus creating jobs or revenue streams, because if you look at Michigan, for example, with all the manufacturing jobs, back in the late 70s, there was 478,000 automotive jobs between Oklahoma and the East Coast. In that same space, there's less than 100,000 right now. So the partial decline of the workforce is by the same people that's passing these laws.
I know.
You know, and that's
Like
what's really
so hypocritical.
exactly.
It's so hypocritical.
Some of this stuff is designed. Look, I worked in Lansing, worked in the Capitol. Some of this stuff is designed just to get headlines. I mean, the sponsors of some of these bills recognize sometimes these bills aren't going anywhere, but it gets them on the evening news, or it gets them talked about as we're doing today. It'll be interesting to see if the Senate does pass it this session. But it is something that I've seen before.
Well, you know, not only talked about, it goes to their next campaign.
Well, it's true. They run on this stuff, and what they will do, and we talk about it frequently on this broadcast. It's a boogeyman tactic.
Right.
Whether the statistics show it or not, the perception is it's a urban problem. And I live on the western side of the state, and I can put it on my campaign.
Well, the same
literature,
thing
and
about
when
drug
time-
tests.
it's
The same thing about drug tests for welfare.
We know
resistance.
statistically that there are far more people who happen to be white who would be would be the people that would be
Candidate
impacted by.
recipients, yes.
by the
And that's
situation.
why they selected the various counties they wanted
Indeed.
to do this in, too.
Yeah, pilots.
Right, right,
Test
right.
cases.
But the ideology, though, is the inner city is where most of the recipients of those funds are. But when you're talking about a state like Michigan, the vast amount of funds recipients are out there in those areas where
I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you something. I think we all saw this story late last year, where there is more the instances of poverty, urban center type poverty. In one of the wealthiest counties in the country, Oakland County. And they're not just talking about people that live in Pontiac and maybe
Right.
some more urban areas within the county. Lots of people are hurting, and they're not all African American or people of color.
Right, but
Yes.
they paint the picture as it is, you know, just us. Well, tell me this. I think it's crazy. Do you think that Mayor Duggan and his staff should take over the Detroit Public Schools?
at this point, do it matter who takes it over? As long as they do something with it, besides what's been done with it.
I think it does.
Well, let me say this, Chris. I understand that the mayor does have a lot on his plate, but the organization that has been in charge, clearly we need some vision to move that system forward. Whoever allowed anybody come in and say, hey, I'm a charter school and open up and take the funding from the public schools, that school building is still the same size. You still got to pay the same lights and gas, but now half the students are gone because they went over to so-and-so's charter school. I mean, clearly it needs to be revamped. The entire system needs to be revamped. Who they choose to use to do it, I'm not sure, but it's defunct now.
Well, listen. I'm sorry, Chris.
Go ahead.
Well, we did this 10 years ago. Mayor Kilpatrick wanted more say in how schools were run. We had a ballot initiative in the city. Voters overwhelmingly rejected the idea of the mayor having a say in what goes on in public schools. I mean, with all due respect, I'd like the mayor to work on getting streetlights on
Right,
St. Albans,
right.
and making sure that my wife's car doesn't get stolen 5 times in 1 year.
I mean, that
or
was
helping us
crazy.
at least.
Yeah.
I think that the mayor has a lot on his plate, enough on his plate, and I'm not so certain that that's what we need to make Detroit Public Schools a stronger institution.
Right. We have Tom on the line. Good morning, Tom. Hello?
Hello,
Oh, who is this?
this is Theo.
Oh, hey, Theo. I thought I had Tom on the line. Is he on the other line? Oh, okay, Theo.
I can hold.
Okay. Well, okay, we'll go to Tom and we'll come back to Theo. Or if
That's
you,
fine.
or I can, okay, I'll go to Tom next. Tom, just hold on. Yes, Theo, may I have your comment?
Yes, it always matters who takes over. One, the one in control of the Detroit Public School right now is Governor Snyder. We didn't need it when we had the other governor taking over the public schools. Number two, the mayor does not need to take over the public schools.
I agree.
In my opinion, the purpose for anybody in those arenas wanting to take it over is to manipulate the voting consciousness in the city of Detroit. Right now, we have the issue of Proposal 1 with the increase of the tax 1%. It's not being viewed from both angles, and I do not ever want to see the mayor or the governor manipulating the school system again. We need our public school system.
Oh, yes, definitely.
And she brings up some valid points. But when the system is so defunct, my main focus is who's going to get these kids back on the right track.
Well,
I'm not concerned
but
with.
my part of my
Because of the
thing
governor.
is these people come and take over and they don't have any educators there
Right.
telling them what to do.
Exactly.
They don't have
Exactly.
educators. I remember Roy Roberts. I wrote him one time. I said,
Yes.
this is not a car company.
Right.
You cannot act like these kids are
What
automobiles.
do we have now? Look?
That was his attitude.
And Theo knows this. Full disclosure, I worked for a takeover regime in Detroit Public Schools, and the reality is, when you look at the fiscal situation, when you look at the educational achievement situation, none of them have gotten any better over the last 10 or
Not
15 years.
better.
You talk about on this day, it was on this week 15 years ago when Governor Engler took over the Detroit Public Schools. It had a surplus at that time. And quite frankly, some of the scores were getting better in 1999. In 2015, we've got some real challenges. My kid goes to a great Detroit Public School, but the reality is most kids don't go to a school that's as great as Chrysler.
Right. It was mid-range at the time it was taken over, and the desire was to take that surplus money, and after which the mayor was involved in taking, what was it, Ken, about $80,000 of the surplus?
Yeah, I mean for the summer.
Clean up, fix up, clean
Yeah, the
up.
summer fix-up program in
Right, and
2000.
Adamani said in the paper it was an abysmal failure. He stated that.
I just have to say this. I'm going to be the devil's advocate on this one because these are some things I do know. In the schools, some of the demise of the schools, people don't write in because I don't care, is the fact that some parents came in and wanted to run the schools. This started back in the late 70s, mid 70s to late 70s. We want to be in there. We want to see what they teach, and we want to do this and that. Second part of it, and there is a second part. That there were some principals I knew of who had pop bottle machines and all these things, taking the money for themselves and not putting it into programs
I remember
in the
that.
schools. There was so much corruption. I knew of people who said, I want to be a principal. I said, why would you want to be a principal? Because I knew their character piece. And they say, well, shoot, I make more money, this, that, and the other thing. The reasons weren't right. Yet, there were a lot of principals who were great, great principals, but they came in, they brought them in to repair situations that had already kind of gone down the tubes. And lastly, I remember I was on a North Central accreditation team, and I went over to Northwestern High School at one time. This was back in the 80s, early 80s. And as far as attendance was concerned, okay, the teachers would take attendance, then they'd send the attendance down. A lot of the offices never contacted parents that their children weren't in school until almost a week later. So their system was bad at reporting truancies or absences. It just seems like a lot of things fell through the cracks. And like I said, they don't have, Engler took over the schools, and they had people running them who had no idea what education was.
I agree. two points. Number one, I find it sad that teachers and principals never run for school board positions. And number two, when the schools were taken over again, the rating was midway. There were as many schools worse than DPS as there were better, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think that we have to look at the morale. As an individual who served as a firefighter for over 10 years, morale is a huge part. And Darnell, you can attest to this. And I think that when you look at, I've looked at the teachers' response on social media to this. It's disrespectful. If you mentioned the principals who have done an excellent job, I would go out on a limb and say many of those principals at first were teachers that came up, and so they were tested by fire. They had skin in the game. When you appoint a businessman, who's our governor right now is a self-announced, he's a business geek, right? Yeah. He's not an educator. And this is just not about business as usual. There is a level of understanding that he won't have. And if you appoint someone who's strictly based on X's and O's, based off of the last 15 years, it proves that it doesn't work.
Some of it is stability, y'all. The Detroit Public Schools, for example, have had, I think, 15 leaders since 1989. The average life of a superintendent or CEO or emergency manager in Detroit is less than 3 years. You're never going to have, until you get some continuity, have all those skill sets that you talked about, Chris, but also having some continuity. Either a board drives them out, or a legislature drives them out, or corruption drives them out, but there's never any stability. You know, think about it, it's all relative, right? Did you ever think that when Arthur Jefferson was superintendent for 15 years that you never have a leader in Detroit Public Schools stay longer than 3 or 4? I mean, that doesn't work. It doesn't
But then
work.
they hired a Connie Calloway, who had come from Ohio, who had the worst record in Ohio, and they got her for superintendent of schools. Who are these people?
Right, and who made that
That
decision?
that was an elected school board that did that. Now we can't blame John Engler.
No, I'm not.
Right,
I'm
and that's
not
what I'm saying,
blaming
though.
him. I
Who-
just said, who
Right.
are these people?
And those board members were elected by people that look like you and me that live in our neighborhoods. Now, we want to tell the truth. We got to tell the whole truth.
And that's true.
believe it.
And
No.
so that's why at this juncture, and Theo, I appreciate everything you're saying, and I understand exactly what you're saying about the mayor and as it relates to Governor Engler. But at the end of the day, we have to start making decisions that's going to be beneficial for the children.
Yes.
Period.
Because
And
I don't
and
understand how
my
the school
point
board
is,
has somebody on it who abused his own kids.
and my point is,
Yes.
I don't care who that person is, as long as it's beneficial for the children. And it's certainly not your
Theo,
boy,
we
one
still
tough,
have-
one
we
tough
still-
nerd.
How is
We
Mayor
still
Duggan qualified?
he doesn't
No,
qualify.
I'm not saying that he is qualified.
No, but,
And if
we
you notice
still
at
have
the
Tom
beginning,
on
what
the
I
line,
said
so
was,
Theo, thank you. I'm gonna go to
It's
Tom.
great to be back on table talk.
Yeah,
Good
yes.
morning, Tom.
Good morning. How's everyone?
Fine. I know you having been a teacher, you have something to say.
Yeah, you know what? And when people went to the poll this last election to vote for the mayor, I don't remember seeing anything on there that said that the mayor should also run the Detroit Public Schools. He was elected to do one thing. When I say he, I'm talking about Mayor Duggan. He was elected to do one thing and one thing only, and that was to run the city of Detroit. Period. Okay? And I mean, to go and want to now take, and they're just not talking about DPS, they're talking about schools, okay? EAA, charter, and DPS, and putting that on his plate. I mean, those schools have their own myriad of problems. And then even this, with the emergency manager, which we've had 4 now, Darnell Early being the latest one, Snyder says, and I paraphrase, that an emergency manager has not worked for DPS students. And he goes and appoints Mr. Early after Jack Martin made his exit. And I'm going, well, like, okay, if the previous 3 haven't worked, why? And I asked him that question. I said, why would you appoint another one? And he said something about, well, they started to show some signs in terms of decreasing the deficit. That deficit has been like a roller coaster ride, because when you look at things historically, in 1999, when English, the Big John, stepped in and took control of the DPS, there was $100 million surplus. Now, we fast forward to 2015. I just read in the paper this morning that the deficit could possibly be $177 million this year.
Doesn't
And
that
it's a-
remind you, though, of bad debt? When you get it, it seems like you never could pay it down. It seems like it's increasing because of the interest and all of this stuff. It's just bad debt and
Exactly.
bad management and
And you
lack
know
of
what?
accountability.
And see, that deficit has at one time had spiked as high as $370 million. So you're talking about close to a $500 million. I mean, a billion is 1,000 times a million, okay? $500 million that was squandered. And this is all up under state guise, mind you. And, you know, and to mention Connie Calloway, that woman was a joke. She was ran out of 2 school districts, all right?
But Tom, you remember? I think you were probably part of the district at the time. Again, I guess the point I'm getting at, and the original question was, should Mayor Duggan be running the schools? I think
No.
the thing that's going to help Detroit Public Schools out the most is us. We as parents, as community members, where schools are. I don't think there's a white horse, coming to save DPS. I think that Mayor Duggan's got enough to do. If we can just get street lights, and not in selected neighborhoods, but if everybody can get street lights, whether you live on Gratiot or off of Grand River, I mean, everybody should have it. He should be getting up every day trying to do that, and leave the schools to educators, people who are professionally trained to do so.
I agree.
I got a quick question.
What DPS needs is they need a strong academician/superintendent who's has a track record of turning around a large district. All right. Has
Tom,
improved test scores.
Hold on, Tom. Darnell has a
Right, Tom, a two-part question for you. The deficit, you say the 177 million, is that encompassing all entities, the DPS, the EAU, EAA, I'm sorry, as far as the charter?
Detroit Public School. No, this is just DPS.
Okay. So, and then the second part of the question is, the people that you said that we need to hire to run the schools, would they also be encompassing running all 3 of those different organizations, or is it just DPS?
Well, I was speaking, primarily for DPS. Okay. I wasn't talking about the EAA because, this whole thing, in a manner of speaking, has been all about DPS.
Oh, that's
Right.
yeah.
And the reason I bring that up, Tom, is because that's one of my arguments that EAA and the charter schools take away funding from the public school, and whoever allowed that process to happen.
They've been like leeches.
And taxpayers are on the hook for the schools that are in the EAA.
Yep.
Taxpayers are on the hook for the capital improvement bond money that was incurred while those EAA schools were Detroit Public Schools.
Exactly.
So my high school,
Rumford
Detroit
is a
Henry
brand
Ford.
new school.
Yeah, my high school, Detroit Henry Ford, technically isn't a Detroit Public School anymore.
Right.
It's part of EAA. But whether I live on Evergreen or live off St. Alban, I'm paying the debt service on the bonds that went to fix Henry Ford High School.
As far as the EAA and charter schools and whatnot, I think that the colleges and universities that sponsor those schools need to be held
I
equally
think they,
accountable because they're getting state
Yeah,
funds
good point.
And so forth and so on. And it's almost as a business for them. They're just going
Well,
to adopt
Eastern
these-
Michigan
and not
is
going to
trying to
enroll
pull
those
up.
kids either.
Yeah, they're
not
not
going to
gonna-
enroll
they're
them in
not
their
gonna-
college
They're
or
not
university.
going to take those
Exactly.
kids because a lot of those kids can't pass the test.
That's true.
I have a friend who was working at the EAA Henry Ford, and he said a lot of the kids had 6th grade reading levels at the top. So you put
A lot of the teachers weren't certified teachers.
Right, they were not
Teach for
certified. They were
America.
Teach for America teachers. It's so unfair. It seems like they were building a permanent underclass.
But also, they don't teach. If you're not giving resources to teachers, if you're frustrating individuals who have that desire, and every time there's a problem, you want to correct it on their pay scale or correct it on the resources that they have available, it discourages individuals who would ultimately become teachers. I speak to educators all the time, and they're as frustrated as every other public servant.
Here's here's one of the indications that I knew we were in trouble. I was at the Mackinac Regional Chamber of Commerce Mackinac Conference about 10 years ago, and Jana Garrison, then the president of the Detroit Federation of Teachers, said in front of a full of educators, lawmakers, and the like. She said, "I encourage my members to, once it becomes 4 o'clock, to get in their cars and zoom out of Detroit, only to return back in the morning when school starts." Look, the reality is that 250,000 people have left Detroit in the last 15 years, and they're just not, those aren't white folks. Those are the black middle class, the black working class. People have left for a lot of different reasons. Don't get me wrong, I still live in the city. I understand why people have left. But you can't have it both ways. You're not going to be able to sustain an institution like Detroit Public Schools, like the city of Detroit, because the square mileage doesn't get any smaller. You still got all these buildings. I mean, drive around these neighborhoods and you look at these closed schools. It looks like a bomb. It looked like a bomb hit the place.
Yeah,
you can't see that every day.
I passed guests on Finkel today, and I said, I thought to myself, I said, I remember when that school was thriving.
My first cousins went to that school. I spent time on Myers and Finkel all through my childhood. It's depressing.
Right.
I drive by there every day when I go swim.
I mean, yes,
luckily,
well,
Ray Ray and Pookie haven't hit it yet, but
here's what I'm saying, and I know we've taken a long time on this subject. I think it's a very important subject, but until the school board, as elected, doesn't have but so much power. Isn't that correct?
That's currently constituted. Well, they really don't have any power now.
Right.
They don't have any
And they
power.
have this person who's the emergency manager. They're just there to count numbers, and it's still not working. So they have to come in with something else. Something else has. If something doesn't work and you keep on falling into the same hole all the time, why do you keep doing it?
It's been 16 years. It's been 16 years since John Engler and the state legislature took over the Detroit Public Schools. It hasn't got on balance. It hasn't gotten any better. And in fact, you could make the argument that it's gotten worse. This is on the hands of the legislature and former governors. It's on our hands too, and I've talked about that part of it. But you cannot escape the fact that it's been 16 years, a generation. Somebody that was in kindergarten at that time, they've already graduated from high school.
Really, they could go to college. They could just.
So where do we go from here is the question.
Well, in my view, it certainly is not an experiment, another experiment, in allowing the mayor to run Detroit Public Schools. That to me is another experiment.
That's a no-no.
I would much rather have somebody who is a career educator. That is an innovator. The person doesn't have to come from 7 Mile or Mac, but he or she has to be somebody who can motivate, because you got to motivate staff. We talked about morale. You got to be able to motivate staff. You got to be able to motivate local leaders, the principals. I mean, to be honest with you, Brenda, the only thing I disagree with you on about the parental involvement piece, studies do show. And data do show in schools. Let me just do this real quick. I know it's your show. Don't just give me 30 seconds.
No, it isn't that. I got a butt for you. Go on.
All right. Let me
Cut
just
off
say
mic
this.
3.
You can look at the numbers. The schools that have done better over the past 20 years have been schools where there has been a good marriage of parental involvement and local decision making with leaders, administrators, and teachers who want to be there. Chrysler works because people want to be there.
Okay, but that isn't what
Bates
I'm
works
talking
because people wanna
about.
be
I'm
there.
talking about parents who came in, ran a bunch of good teachers away. There were a bunch of those. I'm not talking about, because I was very active in my children's school and the school board. They hated to see me even walk into a school board meeting. I understand that, but I didn't want to take over the schools. These people I'm talking about wanted to take over the schools. They didn't have the background there. They just came in, stirred the pot, and then left and went to another. That's the people I'm talking about.
Of course,
That's
the parents should have input. Of course, wherever your child goes to school at, they should have it. But at this juncture, what I'm looking for, or what I would like to see, is some of the things you talked about. those dynamic individuals that can come in and motivate people that are innovative and have a forward thinking. That's what we do need. But what I'm saying is, where do we get it from? How do we begin that process?
I agree with what you said, Ken, as well. However, I do think that it should be someone from here. I'm tired of emergency managers coming from across the country, and when they fail, they can run right back home.
Wait a minute. Some of these emergency managers from Detroit Public Schools were from here.
I understand
What
that.
I'm talking about is people. Sometimes you can import somebody who has made it work.
You can. However, I feel that this is a situation that it will be best served for a person to have roots here. Because you have to still hold your head up. You have to look at the people that you grew up with, and there's a certain level of accountability.
But what-
Hold on,
It
let me
hasn't
finish.
worked, though,
There's
Chris.
still a certain level.
It
There's
hasn't
enough
worked.
talent.
But it
There's a
hasn't
talent
worked.
pool here that hasn't been turned over. And maybe you dig deeper, but you can't tell me that there's no one that is from here or has skin here that is qualified.
I'm
You
not
don't have to
telling.
go to
I'm
LA
not.
or Virginia or
I'm not telling you that, but they haven't done that.
neither have the ones that have been imported.
No, I'm just saying they haven't had people.
What-
Can I say this? They haven't had people who've been these takeover people who were not from Michigan. That's what I'm trying to tell you. They haven't had somebody come in except this damn Callaway woman who was from Ohio and who knew somebody. I knew that was the deal on that.
Your
You need
sorority
to do.
sisters call you, and your frat brother call you. Nah, I mean, look.
Yeah. I know about a lot of things I'm not even saying on this show. Because if I say it, I
Think y'all
bust
gonna get- y'all
everything.
gonna get mad and came back here, y'all gonna get me in trouble.
Don't let me start.
Don't
Tom,
go
we
back
gotta
on
go.
the road.
Thank you for your call. I'll
Amongst the
continue
bruh.
this. This is an ongoing conversation. And Darnell, sometimes you got to wipe the slate clean so you could start building again.
And that's what I'm saying. So it's not that I'm rooting for the mayor to take over the public school system, but I am rooting for somebody different to take it over than who has it now or who have had it in the past.
And somebody-
Because I believe the school system, get rid of the EAA, get rid of the charter schools. We need to be one. That funding needs to be to the Detroit Public Schools. If you got 4,000 kids showed up last year on count day, and you only got 2,000 showed up this year because the other 2,000 left and went to charter schools and EAA, your funding is going to be cut short. That school will not be able to survive, and that's what's happening.
People have been looking at charter schools, EAA, and all this like they're the panacea. Well, my kid isn't doing good in this school. Let me move him over somewhere. Well, Rolling Stone gathers no moss.
Well, I knew that, the charter school piece. I knew we were in trouble about 10 or 12 years ago, and I'm driving along the Lodge service drive, and I see a charter school open up in a building that used to be a Top Hat. I mean, we got to get serious.
Right. And then they put some famous name on it.
And look, and I
like
understand-
Martin Luther King.
Absolutely. I mean, and I understand that our forefathers, went to school in schoolhouses that had dirt floors, and it ain't about what the structure looks like, about what's in it. But that's symbolism, Chris.
I know. I will always believe I'm walking in the Top Hat.
Can I get 3 cheeseburgers? And oh, by the way,
young cats don't know about Top Hat.
Where your homework at?
I know. But, you're absolutely
my
right.
son up at 3. Can I get
But
3 cheeseburgers?
and I want to say something else. Who talked about morale? Which one?
Both of us talked
Okay, morale. I have had principals who have said, well, we're getting ready, this was in the 80s, we're going to be getting in the, what do they call it? The junkie babies now. They say, we're getting in the junkie babies, they're starting to come, and it's going to be hard, but this and that. For some teachers, that would have been said, oh man, let me get the heck out of here. But sometimes you can't listen to that administrator. Sometimes you can't listen to that doomsday provider. You have to go on and listen to yourself. I said, I got to make this job good for me. And that's what I did. And they need somebody in there who can encourage these teachers to say, listen, all is not lost. You know what these kids need to learn, and so forth and so on. And we have talked about this to almost the end of the show. We got a good, golly, I got to save all these topics for next week. Golly.
Let's do our predictions.
Yes, I'm getting ready. NCAA permission. I was going to say NAACP predictions, but NCAA prediction, the Sweet 16. Quickly.
I think that it might be a consensus on the panel that
Kentucky.
The University of Kentucky.
Okay, next.
However, Michigan State University, which my brother played for, he
Okay.
would kick me in the neck if I
Yeah.
did. And I do feel that they've got, outside of Kentucky, the best chance with Israel.
Yeah, that's
No,
just
nobody wants to
home.
play Michigan State.
Nobody
it's
wants
the
to.
scariest, it's the
Exactly.
scariest team in the tournament. But Kentucky is a pro squad, and I can't see them losing.
They said they could make
That's-
a playoff in the Eastern Conference of the NBA.
Exactly.
They could
Right,
beat the-
exactly.
They could beat the Pistons
Right.
tonight.
You know, listen,
Drummond has something to
Kentucky
say
has
about that.
Kentucky has long been a powerhouse, and they're going to be there every year. But Michigan State, like I said last week, Brenda, I got to go with the home team. I'm gonna put it all on black. In this case, green. I'm gonna put it all on green.
Root for the
Green make green.
homeboy.
Exactly. I got to give it to and I'm a U of M fan, but I got to give it to Michigan State.
Same here. I think that of the remaining coaches, Izzo is the most.
That's what I was
dynamic.
gonna say.
And I think that he has the charisma to win a game himself. And I think that when you get down to the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, I think that coaching
And
is
the
what-
Final Four.
The Final Four
It
can
shines.
win you a game.
What
He
I
shines.
what I love absolutely what I love about Izzo is, and people criticize him sometimes for putting all these top 10 schools on his schedule in December, and so he loses a lot of games, and the seeding goes down. But it's brilliant if they had played those games and 2 or 3 months
Don't
later.
tell them. They
No,
don't tell them. They may change it up. Right? Don't tell them.
but Izzo makes a run almost every year.
He
And-
does.
and large part because of that, because most of the time he doesn't
They
necessarily have
said
the best.
16 out of 19.
I mean,
Yeah.
he's had some very talented guys, but all of his guys, he's had some guys that don't really match up to maybe some other talent, but they go a little bit further. Look, if we could ever get rid of one and done in college basketball, if it ever went away, the one and done, a guy that stays a year and leaves, Izzo would probably win a lot of
Okay,
years.
got the
No,
consensus
exactly.
there.
They shouldn't
Wait,
have to
hold
go to college.
on.
They should just be able
I
to go
want to
straight to the NBA.
applaud Dean Smith, who died recently in February, great coach of North Carolina, who gave each of his players, his good players,
Well,
$200
Letterman.
left.
Letterman.
Yep, it's all
Right.
Letterman.
Roughly 187. Roughly.
When I heard this, it kind of flipped on my head, and I thought about how the forethought went into doing that, and how really we in our community need to give some forethought into what happens.
Yeah.
Because he left money for players, and you have people that died.
And one of the players was Michael
Right.
Jordan, who
I was
doesn't
gonna
need.
say, can I get Mike's $200?
Right. Well, we got to wrap it up, everybody. This goes so fast.
Take your
Oh,
tour
ladies
with the
and
top hat.
gentlemen, it's been, that school is a top
Right.
hat. Oh, God.
2 hour special
I can't
for-
get that out of my head. We will see you again next week, next Friday, Table Talk.
2 hour special
Thank
for
you,
the holiday.
gentlemen. Yes.